This video will cover the cross-table link function within the expression builder. The cross-table link function allows us to quickly bring in data from one table to another. This is particularly useful when we're doing modeling, where you need to prep and transform data from multiple tables to bring into one core table from which you build the model. However, the cross-table link function is not limited to only use for models. For example, if I have a table of people and of financial transactions, whether it is a table of gifts or a table of sales, for example, the link function allows us to calculate the total revenue for each person.
You'll need a couple things to use the cross-table link function: 2 tables and a key field that's in both. A good example is a table of customers or people and another table for their transactions. The key field would be the customer ID number.
Let's look within Advisor. Here we have 2 tables, one of customers and one of transactions. To open the expression builder, we can go to the left-hand side with the tasks view and click on Build Expressions. Within the expression builder, we can go down to Functions, scroll down to Cross Tables, and expand that by clicking the plus, and double-click the link. Here we'll see the link function with the 5 arguments, and we'll go through each of these arguments momentarily. Let's do the example of the total revenue for each customer. Since we're bringing in data from the transactions to the customers table, we'll want to make sure that this first table here is set to the customers. Let's call this field total revenue. Now, let's go through the arguments of the link expression. This first is key 1. This is a field within the table that we're currently working in. And in our case, this will be the customer ID number, as you can see in here. So let's type in ID number. Table 2 is the table to which we'll be linking to. In our case, transactions. Third, key 2 is the field that exists in the transactions table that we'll be linking on. So in our case, this is also the customer ID number. So it's called the ID number, but it exists in the transactions table. Okay. The fourth argument is expression. Here, we specify what data within the transactions table we want to aggregate. In this example, we want to look at amount. Finally, the last argument, as you can see, lists the various options for how we want to summarize and aggregate the data. We can sum, we can take an average. We'll go over each of these in further examples later on in the video. For now, let's set this as sum. Once we are satisfied with our expression, we then click Evaluate. Now we can see that the total revenue has been calculated for each person. We can press OK. Then let's see this total revenue added into this table here. Total revenue. And so now we see for each ID number, the total revenue for each customer.
Since we just did our first example, it might be helpful to go over some some simple link function syntax. There are only two things to remember. Number one, use single quotes around each argument. And number two, other than those single quotes around the entire expression argument, the expression adheres to regular syntax rules. To review that, check out the Expression Builder Basics video and advanced tutorials. Let's look at that syntax in action through another example. So we have the total number of transactions per customer, but what if we just wanted to know their largest transaction amount? I only have to change one argument here. Sum will become max, and we can leave everything else the same because we still want to use the amount field, but we only want the largest transaction amount per ID number or customer. Let's change to max. And hit evaluate and see what we come up with. So it looks like that worked. Let's press OK and add it to our data sheet. And here we have it.
In the first two examples, we kept using the amount field. However, if we wanted to count how many transactions per customer, the amount is not the most useful. However, by adjusting the expression, we can count the number of transactions. Let's do that. Again, go into the expression builder. We are going to use the link function, ID number, going to the transactions table, to ID number. Now, here in the expression, instead of putting a field name, we can do something like 1. What this does is for every row, it will put a 1. And combining this with the sum option here, will essentially sum how many ones there are for each person, which in turn counts the number of transactions. So number of transactions. Click evaluate, and we can see the number of transactions here. Let's press OK. And we can add this to our data sheet, number of transactions. And so now we have the number of transactions for each person. We can always make some more adjustments and edit the expression even more to bring in more complex queries and complex summaries of the data. For example, I'm going to edit the number of transactions with a simple if-then statement. Let's look at number of transactions in the year 2004. So I'm going to do number of transactions 2004. By adding the expression here, we do a simple if-then statement. If the year equals 2004, then 1, else 0. Thus, rather than putting a 1 next to each transaction, we will only look at the transactions which correspond to a year of 2004. Same thing with the sum, but since it's a sum, zeros won't add to that, and we'll only count the transactions in 2004. Let's evaluate that. If we look at that as well, we can see the number of transactions for Harley Oliver. Let's actually click on that person and see those transactions. in 2004. You can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 transactions in 2004. We can take this a step further, and instead of just counting the number of transactions in a particular year, we can look at the total amount. Go into expressions, customers. Let's edit this 2004. Instead of 2004 number of transactions, we can do revenue, 2004. So we still want this if 2000 year equals 2004. However, we don't want to look at 1. We want to look back again at the amount. And once again, else 0. We don't want to count the amounts for non-2004 years. And summing this, we can add that even more to this table. And so we can see the revenue for 2004 for Harley. So if I actually go here and select the 6 transactions in 2004, you can see that they sum up to 114,000. And we have that for each customer. So by adjusting the expression, we can really powerfully make selections on what we want to aggregate, what we want to summarize. Do we want to look at a specific year? Do we want to look at the last 5 years? Do we want to look at certain criteria of amounts greater than, $100? We want to look at only the large transactions. So we can use the expression builder to really narrow down and really focus in on subcategories and subsections of our larger transaction table.
Let's look at some of the other aggregation options. This time, we want to see how many years has there been a transaction over $1,000. We don't want to know how many transactions they had, but how many years was there a transaction. Let's go back to the expression builder. We're going to stay in the customers table and name it how many years. Let's type out our expression and then think about what aggregation option we want to use for this example. Link, ID number, transactions, ID number, and let's put some string syntax there. And then our expression. So we want to say if amount is greater than $1,000, then we want to know the year of the transaction. Else, we want it to be missing. And then our aggregation option. We're going to use the distinct option. It's going to count the number of distinct years with a transaction over $1,000. Let's evaluate our expression and see what we come up with. Looks like it worked. So notice that we're using the missing now instead of 0 in our expression. The aggregation function ignores missing rows. A missing won't count as a distinct year while a 0 would. Let's press OK and see if it worked. We can pick Harley Oliver again. And let's count the number of distinct years he has a transaction over $1,000. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we have 5 over here.
Any returns any value from the expression. Since this is a little trickier, let's look at an example in PowerPoint. Here, I have a subset of the transactions table for a particular customer ID, along with their amounts, and 2 other fields that we'll go over as I go through this example. For the any, if we did an any based off of amount, then any would pull any one of these amounts into our main customer table. However, as you can see, this is probably not very useful on its own due to the fact that we don't know which one of the amounts that it would pull. However, we can utilize the fact that aggregation ignores missings to focus in on the choices that the any will pick up. For example, another way to calculate the largest transaction for each person is to look at the max amount with any. Notice how max amount returns automatically in each row the maximum amount for those transactions for each person. So in this case, $20. Any will still pull any one of these values into our main customers table, but since they're all the same value, it doesn't matter. And it will pull the correct amount of 20 being the maximum transaction amount. However, we can take this one step further with this last optional example. If we do an expression such that it's if the amount is equal to the max of amount, that is if this is equal to the max, then we list the amount, else missing. Notice how for each of these rows where the amount is not equal to 20, we have a missing, whereas in the row that is equal to 20, we have a 20 listed. Now, since any ignores the rows that have missing values, we can effectively eliminate all the other rows that we don't want to look at and only look at the value of 20. So if you notice, these 3 expressions, so in our expression builder we'll have amount, max amount, or this expression here, each of these 3 gives us the same result, but utilize the any in a slightly different way. You can apply a similar logic to how any will be most likely to be used if we want to flag a certain type of behavior. Let's see this example in action within Advisor. Going to the expressions, and let's call this maximum, or let's call this largest transaction. As before, we'll want to make sure that we do the ID number, then go to the transactions table, link to the ID number. Now let's use the any, and for the expression, we'll do that last example with if the amount is equal to the max amount, then amount else missing. And evaluate that and press OK. And if we go add this largest transaction here, we can note for maybe Alan Gray and sort by the highest, we see that the 14 million transaction is the largest, and we see that present here in our data sheet of the customers. Or if we look at Gracie Hickman, that 6 million transaction is the same. However, the any function is most used when we want to flag a certain type of behavior. For example, if we're not interested in how many transactions within a certain year, but rather if there was a transaction in a certain year. For example, was there a transaction for a person in 2006? Yes or no? For example, let's check and look for a flag of whether or not someone had a transaction in the year 2006. So let's transaction in 2006. Go to the link cross table here, and like the others, ID number, and then we look at the transactions table. As you can see, the first three arguments are pretty similar for each of the link functions. The real meat comes in the expression and the aggregation type choice. So for here, we want to check whether or not someone had a transaction in 2006. How we can do that is if we do if year equals 2006, then yes, else missing, and then do any. Now, similar to before with the maximum amount, this will put a missing wherever there is a year that is not in 2006. So it will put a yes wherever there's, and it will put a yes wherever there is a transaction in the year 2006. However, for each person, it can if a person has multiple transactions in a year, then a yes will be put after each one of those. But since we're looking at any of choices between either yes, yes, or yes will always bring back a yes. So let's evaluate this and press OK and check for a transaction in 2006. So looking at the yeses here, we'll be able to see that there is indeed at least one transaction. There are multiple transactions, but at least one in the year 2006. If we look at someone who has missing here, no transactions at all.
In sum, the link function expands upon and enhances existing tools in Advisor like the Link Wizard. It's a simple yet versatile function to use in the Expression Builder